A Christmas list for cronies. That's how Brian Balfour describes Governor Roy Cooper's proposed budget. Brian is Senior Vice President of Research at the John Locke Foundation. And Brian, you took a close look at this budget proposal from Governor Roy Cooper, and a lot of the stuff in there, as you suggest, seems to be sort of placating a list of cronies and special interest groups rather than dealing with core functions of government.
Yeah, that's right. And as I outline, at the top of the list is clean energy, cronyism. Cooper throws some money at his allies, if you will, in the clean energy industry, throwing some additional subsidies at what, we talk a lot about at the Locke Foundation, this quote-unquote clean energy being very unreliable, inefficient, and expensive energy, and other funds receiving dollars in Cooper's proposal are just kind of the typical programs that throw taxpayer dollars at businesses, politically favored businesses, and then a lot of kind of what I term niceties, the kind of the parks and the aquariums and zoos and things like that. Things that are nice to have, things that, make no mistake, I don't personally oppose, but we feel fall far beyond the proper scope of government and should instead be funded by voluntary contributions and customers.
We're going to get into some of those details. First of all, though, we ought to point out that all of this helps contribute to a spending increase that in the first year of the two-year plan would be something like 11.6%. That's a lot.
Yeah, that is pretty eye-popping right there. 11.6%, double digit. That would mark the largest year-over-year increase in the state budget in about 2 decades. Which certainly raises some eyebrows, and of course with a lot of uncertainty still as we try to hopefully unwind the shutdowns from the pandemic. There's still a lot of economic uncertainty about how things are going to shake out and the long-term economic effects of that. So we think it's pretty short-sighted and irresponsible to go that aggressively increase state spending and ratchet up these commitments during such uncertain times.
You've already referenced the renewable energy cronies who might benefit. One of the things in your recent report on this is you suggest this could be a minor down payment for a plan that would be far more costly in the long run. So even though this is a lot of money already, this is the type of thing that if we start along this path, we're going to be spending a heck of a lot more money on renewable energy.
Right, yeah, that was referencing $500,000 for, I think it was a study to study a proposed plan. Of course, the plan then would be something that involves a lot of taxpayer dollars funding very inefficient forms of energy that will drive up energy costs and hit the poor households especially hard.
You also list several examples of taxpayer giveaway programs that we've seen, unfortunately, from both parties, but the Democrats seem to be particularly interested in having these taxpayer giveaways. This is the type of thing you don't like to see in a budget.
Right, exactly right. It's just more taxpayer dollars being siphoned to politically favored companies or targeted industries. And we think at the Locke Foundation a much better approach is across-the-board tax relief. Treat all businesses the same, and that's a much better, both economically and from a fairness standpoint.
We've already touched on it a bit, but part of this budget proposal is a $4.7 billion bond package. And here's where you talked about some of the things that you might consider the niceties, because some of this is for K-12 education, university projects. A lot of people support those. But there are a lot of things in here that you might look at and say, does the government really need to spend this money?
Yeah, and that's getting back to the things that I mentioned before, the kind of the museums, aquariums, grassroots arts programs, things of that nature, and also just the top line number of that $4.7 billion. That would more than double the current state debt. The general fund tax supported debt, which conservative leadership has done an excellent job of winding down that debt over the last decades and significantly reducing it. And this would just really ratchet it back up. And what that does then is that creates recurring commitments of these for this debt repayment that needs to be paid, and that's plugged into the budget year after year, and that of course then siphons resources away from other perhaps more important operations.
One of the things that you list in your report on this that I think will be eye-popping for folks is near the end, you list a number of other line items, and I think I count 16 of them, and they total somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million. And these are all the kinds of things that you look at and say, does government really need to spend money on this? And if so, does it need to spend this much money on it? We're talking about a new education center at the Mountain Island Education State Forest, $500,000 for the Queen Anne's Revenge shipwreck excavation project, a whole list of things like this that don't seem to be core government functions.
Right, and a lot of these are things that are regularly funded in state budgets. So I think it's important to point this out, and I have been for years. When critics say that, well, state government or the state budget has been, cut to the bone and really reduced, but it's always important to point some of these things out, that these are items that are being funded, that are being proposed to being funded. So when you try to say that there's not enough money to, say, give, teachers raises or not enough money for that important core government service, but then they are going out and continue to fund items like these, the argument doesn't quite square up. So I think it's important to call out that the state budget does continue to include, the proposals continue to include a lot of these items that are far removed from what we would consider core functions of government.
We've hit many of the highlights, but you can find many more details by going to johnlocke.org and looking for the piece titled "Cooper's Budget is Just a Christmas List for Cronies." Its author is Brian Balfour. He is Senior Vice President of Research at the John Locke Foundation. Brian, thanks so much.
Thank you, Mitch.